World Apartment Horror. Japanese film from 1990. Never heard of this. Watched the trailer for it, thought it looked fun. It's about a yakuza that owns a little tenement house that only houses immigrants, all of whom are from the Asian subcontinent. There's a Taiwanese person, some folks from South Korea, somebody from Pakistan, all people who fall under the category of Asian. The Yakuza main character is tasked with basically making life for these tenants in this building completely unlivable so that they will move, and then they can demolish this building and replace it with a brothel that this guy will get to run. And also, there may or may not be a demon in the house. The last Yakuza that they got to try to do this went completely off his rocker and nearly killed a guy and then disappeared into the wilderness and maybe stole a magical sword. Watch the movie and find out how that plot goes. So yeah, I never heard of this movie, and I went into it not really knowing what to expect, hoping for maybe some Evil Dead vibes from the trailer. What I got was a really heartfelt and interesting anti-racist film about how Japanese nationalism is actually pretty whack and shouldn't be embraced. But the big surprise with this one was the crew that was involved. This is directed by Katsuhiro Otomo, who did the manga Akira and also the film Akira. He co-wrote the script with Keiko Nobumoto, who is also known for being the lead writer on Wolf's Rain and Cowboy Bebop. And the story is by Satoshi Kon of Paranoia Agent and Millennium Actress and Paprika and all of the things fame. The talent on this production is so stacked, it's unbelievable. And the only available version that I could find is a rip from a DVD in the late 90s, and that's the best. There isn't an HD remaster. It's sort of astonishing. My main takeaway from this coming out of it was, I want to put this movie on a flag and wave it in the face of every fucking weeaboo I've ever met who has insisted that Japan doesn't operate on our ideas of racism and that it's naive and Western essentialist to try to read racism into any of their media because it's such a different culture. They just don't have racism like we have racism. This movie is explicitly saying, hey, Japanese people, stop being so fucking racist. Like, there's this scene where the main Yakuza guy is just riding so hard on his, like, supremacy over these people who are all, like, perfectly nice to him, and they respond to his attempts to be disruptive with being like, oh yeah, he's throwing a party. Oh, he's such a kooky guy. Oh, he's so fun. He's such a weird... They're just, like, nice, pleasant people who are just trying to get by, and this is the only place where they can find housing. And there's this fantastic scene.
とにかく出稼ぎだったらもっと近くへ行けよ。アラブで油田でも掘ってらいいだろう。みんな同じ。アジア人です。日本人はアジア人じゃない。日本人は白人だ。
And even the other Yakuza that's with him is like, what the fuck are you talking about, white? It's awesome. It's such a great encapsulation of the social utility of whiteness and how it emerges. I am part of the okay category. You are part of the other category. And that gives me carte blanche to treat you however I want and relegate you to whatever dark corner of society I think you deserve to live in. It's also incredibly, incredibly funny, and I think it would be even more funny if you speak Japanese, because you have a number of characters who don't speak Japanese or who only speak like spotty Japanese, and so there's some wordplay in the script. One of the non-Japanese speakers will try to say something, and the main Yakuza guy will be like mishear a word, or the other one of the non-Japanese speakers will mishear one of his words.
俺はヤクザだ。
ヤクさんだ。你新来的吧？你知道塔吉克蹦蹦这个地方吗？
Yeah, this is a great movie. Not particularly well regarded, I feel like. I've looked at some reviews on LETTERBOXD, and a lot of people were like, it's fine, it's funny, it's whatever. Not the best of any of these people's works. It makes sense that there hasn't been a new re-release or whatever. I have a feeling that part of why this movie hasn't gotten much attention, hasn't gotten a big re-release, is precisely because as a film, as a parable, it goes directly against a lot of misconceptions that weebs have about Japanese culture, and does not give them a blank check to pretend that racism isn't a problem in Japan. Also, there's a black character in this movie who is like the most competent of all of the characters, and there is nothing racist about him, and nothing racist happens to him.
この絵描いたの日本人じゃないね。
言ったさんがついてるもの、日本の例ではないでしょう。あくまで国籍はない。
It's awesome. It's such a shocking breath of fresh air when I'm so used to these things not being handled very well or being handled in very broad strokes. And this feels very naturalistic and well observed. And I think that has a lot of value and would be a good addition to any fan of Japanese media's diets or just international cinema in general. 5 out of 5 pumpkins. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It probably doesn't necessarily deserve 5 out of 5, but I'm giving it because I think it's an underdog. And I'm excited to watch this one again. I really hope that sooner or later this gets a Blu-ray remaster. Some of the effects are kind of difficult to see at the end of the film. There's a really cool, very sparsely used monster. It's fun. It's a fun, big cast movie. I really want to see it get a reappraisal. Incantation, Netflix movie by Kevin Ko, is a found footage horror film about possession that happens to this woman's child, and the mom has to figure out what to do about the demon. There's a lot of stuff to like about this movie. On a moment-to-moment level, it is an enjoyable found footage film. It does a lot of good escalation. It has some really fun set pieces. What I really liked about it is that it felt like it evolved the format of the found footage film away from the ruthless, realist framing narrative of this is a document that we found that has not been edited. All we've done is we've taken the most relevant pieces of information and put them in strict chronological order. This has a flashback structure where it'll give us a bit of time in the present and then jump back in time and then, move back and forth. There is a subjectivity to the editing here, and I think the central gimmick is spectacular, where it opens on this notion of optical illusions and how our perception of the world creates the world, and then goes into this prayer and this incantation to help save her daughter, and then the rest of the film sort of jumps back and forth between past and present plot lines. And the film ends on a really, I thought the twist at the end was quite effective. The problem with this movie is that it's probably 20 to 30 minutes too long, and it takes itself way too seriously. It has the problem that so many of these movies have, which is being a parent is the most important and specialist thing that any human could possibly be. And when you're a parent, your child is the center of the universe, and you would do anything to help them. And if anything at any time happens to your precious child, that is grounds for a complete fucking hysterical meltdown, and you are justified in whatever you do for any reason forever. Not the worst offender in this category, but it falls into that where it just becomes sort of an anodyne commentary on parenthood. So supposedly this is inspired by a real incident, this community that believed that there was a demon and basically tortured their children to try to get it out. And the main conceit is that the main character cannot let her daughter eat anything for 7 entire days. Her daughter's 4 or 5 years old. So her daughter's condition sort of decays rapidly as the demon fights back. It becomes this question of is this too much? Is this justified? And I think the film kind of comes down on the answer being yes. And the real mistake was that she didn't follow directions closely enough. I don't know. The biggest problem with this movie really is that its theory of the supernatural doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not internally coherent. The rules are not properly explained. Things happen in extremely different ways depending on what scene. It feels like a movie where what happens and why it happens is mostly dictated by whatever the creator thought would be cool or scary for that scene in that moment. And there's not a whole lot of thought put into how all of this stuff adds up into a coherent theological view on the world. The only thing that makes sense is the melodrama, and the melodrama is so drawn out. It is really, they're really laying it on thick. And then the ending has sort of the classic problem of it has a really cool twist, but once the credits roll and you find yourself thinking about, like, how did we as the theater going audience get access to this footage? Because the film is not necessarily clear on how that works for the final act of the film, which is fine. Like I said, it sort of forgoes the strict literality of the found footage genre in general. It's a weird one. It's one I enjoyed in the moment on a moment-to-moment basis, and then by the end I kind of came away feeling nonplussed. I would give it 2 pumpkins. There's 1 pumpkin for reference on the table here. Not a bad movie. If you're a fan of the found footage genre, I think it is an interesting evolution of the genre in some ways, and on that basis alone, it is well worth watching. But I don't think it works as a movie necessarily. Senritsu Kaiki File Kawasugi, the most terrifying movie in history, directed by Koji Shiraishi. So this is the 6th episode in a series called Senritsu Kaiki File Kawasugi that was highlighted by Nick's Fears by May Leitz.
Everything is suddenly possible with Senritsu Kaiki World Kawasugi.
Last year, we watched 2 of Shiraishi's other films, Noroi, the Curse, and Occult. I don't really know what my favorite movies in these yearly streams are until long after the streams are over. It's really about which movies left an impression on me. And I would say whichever one of those involves the subway bombing is one that I find myself thinking about fairly often. The closing images in that are really something else. Yeah, most terrifying movie in history absolutely falls into that category. It's a found footage film about some paranormal investigators who are going out to investigate a town in rural Japan where supposedly if you visit it, you go insane and then you die. So they visit this town in rural Japan where supposedly you go insane and then you die, and then they all go insane and then they die. But they do so in spectacular, strange, bizarre, and upsetting ways that are a perfect showcase of what I increasingly love about Koji Shiraishi. This is a man who does not give a shit about whether or not the effects in these movies are strictly photorealistic. I think about him a lot in watching a lot of these movies where it feels like they're held back by their desire to reach for photorealism and their fear of being a bit more cartoony. I think that this leans so hard into its almost Photoshop level effects that it wraps back around to being surreal, uncanny, nightmarish horror. That it's just a fun experience. Watching this after Incantation really hammered home for me what I was missing. All of the kills in this are really bizarre, whereas in Incantation, there's a lot of good setup to things happening, but when the things happening, the only consistent death is guy slams head against wall until die. And they do that, I think, 3 different times in Incantation. And it's like the first time was, oh, that's gruesome. Ooh, that's bad. And then they do it again. And it's like, well, can't you come up with something else? Can't you, like, this is a horror movie. Part of the fun is let's find different wretched ways to kill people. And Most Terrifying Movie in History is a great example of a movie that never does the same thing twice. And I would say that just of Shiraishi's filmography. Although I guess technically he is constantly doing the same thing twice, but what he's doing is so madcap that it doesn't matter because nobody else is doing it like him. If your movie can't be mythologically consistent and make sense on a narrative level, then at the very least, it can offer up a million different things that you've never seen before in your entire life. Incantation did not do that, really. This one absolutely did. I highly recommend it. Go watch Nick's Fears video. I would give it 4 out of 5 pumpkins. because it's an episode in a series. It stands alone, but I now want to go and watch the whole thing, and it's all on YouTube. Very easy to watch. The translation's pretty good, so yeah, go watch it. Mystics in Bali. This is certainly the most not a movie we've watched. It's about a Western sociologist who just got done learning all the secrets of voodoo in Africa, going to Bali to learn the mysteries of the Liak, who are a ancient dark magic cult people. It features the use of the Penanggalan, the demon that is like your head ripped off your body with all the guts hanging down. The dub is spectacular. There is an evil witch who is the main antagonist of the film, who has her signature laughter. She is always laughing. She's having a great time, and it is just one of the most spectacular evil witch laughs that you'll ever hear. Like, the story doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, but it does have a scene where main character girl as a Penanggalan goes to a pregnant woman and vampires her by sucking the fetus out of her. There's some great special effects. There's like a Pigman TF that happens, and that suit looks really good. Surprisingly good effects for an extremely low budget film. Some cartoony sort of like opticals and drawn on like lightning bolts and stuff, and I loved all of that stuff. I love it. Is it a good movie? No. Is it unlike anything you've ever seen before in your entire life? Yes.
I have heard that in Western custom, when people say goodbye, they shake each other's hands like this.
That's right.
2.5, 3 pumpkins? Somewhere in there. It's fun. I probably won't watch it again unless I do.
I've got to leave, so goodbye.
Mad Monster Party. This is a Rankin Bass film from the late 60s, where instead of doing Christmassy things, they do Halloween things. And it's spectacular.
Mad Monster Party.
Starring Boris Karloff, and in order of their appearance,
Dracula.
Frankenstein,
The werewolf.
the Hunchback,
The mummy.
Dr. Jekyll,
Mr. Hyde.
and in order of his disappearance,
The invisible man.
also starring Phyllis Diller.
I had never seen this before. Most of the people that we watched it with had never seen it before. I have seen retrospectives of Rankin Bass where they talk about Mad Monster Party and they say, I wanted to like it. I went in expecting to like it, and then I came out feeling like it was very boring and not particularly good. And I don't know what the hell they were talking about.
Bird watching again, Fang? Do you forget the last time you had a roving eye? I kept it in a jar for a week.
Once again, does it make sense? But on the other hand, it has the mummy.
It's the mummy!
Did you hear me? It has the mummy.
It's the mummy!
It has other creatures. It has Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and the Invisible Man and Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and the Bride of Frankenstein and the creature from the Black Lagoon, but it also has the mummy.
It's the mummy!
This is a sort of musical where every once in a while they break out into musical numbers that aren't particularly, you know, it's the late 60s. They're not on a very high budget. They're doing their best, but it does have the mummy.
It's the mummy!
There's just an entire dance sequence with a song about the mummy where basically the only lyrics are, it's the mummy.
It's the mummy!
Because it's the mummy.
It's the mummy!
It's the mummy.
It's the mummy!
It's the mummy!
Dr. Frankenstein in this is played by Boris Karloff, who is once again playing a character who is ready to retire from the work of being a spooky monster guy. So interesting overlap with Targets from earlier. He has just invented a serum that can destroy matter.
Quoth the raven, nevermore.
And he is calling a party of all of the monsters to come to his evil island of evil so that he can show off this cool serum that he invented and then give all of his stuff to whoever his new heir is now that he's retiring from being king of the monsters or ruler of the monsters or whatever. Phyllis Diller is there as the Bride of Frankenstein, and she's a woman who tells rancid jokes, but it's okay because she's only telling them for herself, and she finds them hilarious.
A double cross. What did you expect? The Red Cross?
There's like pop culture references to the time that haven't aged well. And then there's just jokes that aren't good because it was the 60s. But like, it's fun. The animation is fun. There's a lot of ambition involved. It is extremely funny that the redheaded secretary of Dr. Frankenstein starts off as like the conniving woman who wants to steal the inheritance away from the young guy. Then she gets double-crossed and she has a crying breakdown, and then the Jimmy Stewart guy finds her and is like, "No, don't cry. I can't stand to see a woman cry. Oh, you're hysterical." And then he just slaps her twice.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
And then she's like, "Oh,
Felix, I think you're still hysterical."
Oh, Felix.
Oh, finally, a man who hits me. I'm in love."
There never was a love like mine for you.
Then they're together for the rest of the movie and they sail off into the sunset together. The 60s! If you like monsters and you like Rankin Bass, watch this. It's like an hour and a half, but it's fun. It's a fun movie. Watch it with some friends. 4.54. 4 pumpkins. 4 out of 5 pumpkins. The Monster Squad. We did this as a double feature with Mad Monster Party because they're both movies that involve the Universal Pictures pantheon of spooky creatures. Witness the beginning of a dark universe.
It's the mommy!
This is about some kids in LA in the 80s who are big monster nerds, and they just happen to be perfectly positioned to fight back against some monsters when they show up. And Dracula is putting together a crew featuring the Wolfman, the creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein's monster, some brides of Dracula, and of course, the Mummy.
It's the mommy!
Interesting pairing with The Gate, which we watched earlier, in that this is also a kids movie from the 80s, where the kids say a shocking number of slurs. And indeed, it features a sympathetic fat character whose nickname is lovingly Fat Kid.
Hi, I'm Derek, and I'm in the street where Fat Kid is blocking traffic. Fat Kid, can't you stop eating?
So that's sort of unfortunate. In setup, in terms of how it looks, it feels like it shouldn't work. But the dialogue is a lot of fun. The dynamics between the kids, it's very sharp, and there's some really fun lines. It feels a bit try-hard at times. It doesn't always feel sort of natural to who these kids are, and I think part of it is the style of the time. Script was written by Shane Black, who went on to do Iron Man 3, take it or leave it if that's your thing, but also The Nice Guys, which is one of my favorite movies ever. And in fact, this movie ends on exactly the same note as The Nice Guys, basically gesturing to the camera and saying, "Hey, guess what? We're definitely doing a sequel."
Can somebody tell me what the Sam hell is going on around here?
Well, we can, sir.
Who are you?
We're the Monster Squad.
Look at this.
The dialogue here and the character dynamics, it feels like something closer to The Nice Guys, but the visual language hasn't evolved yet to do it well. It's got really fun moments where like this little sister who is constantly being told, no, you can't be part of the monster squad. You're not allowed because you're a little girl. And then she makes friends with Frankenstein's monster and she shows the monster to them. And they're like, it's Frankenstein's monster. And they are afraid to go near him. And she's like, hey, he's a friend. He's our friend. Don't worry about him. And they don't believe her. And she's just like grumpy, like, come on, don't be chicken shit. Which is such a great thing to have a child say. There's a part where they have to kick the Wolfman in the nards.
Kick him in the nards! He doesn't have nards! Do it!
Wolfman's got nards!
It's a fun enough movie, but it's a little bit too sharp on the script. I think that this dialogue needed to be toned down, and apparently the original draft was like 150 pages, and then the director, Fred Decker, had to cut it down some, and there were parts that were trimmed by producers. I think the most interesting thing, looking up this movie in the credits, I saw that the effects were by Stan Winston's studio, and Stan Winston did effects on every single movie from before the digital age that has any kind of effect that you thought, wow, that's really cool. The effects in this are fun. They're fine. They're not the best, but they're not the worst. There's some good creature designs. The werewolf's a little funky. But so in this film, the creature from the Black Lagoon has this full body suit that actually looks really nice. And it was so nice that apparently it was considered the landmark effect of the film. Matt Rose and Steve Wang were the people who were in charge of creating the Gillman suit. It was so good that those two people were then put in charge of making the Predator suit in a little film you might have heard of called Predator.
Ugly motherfucker.
So that's pretty neat. On that basis alone, I'm glad that the Monster Squad exists. I'm talking a lot about the production because I find the ramifications of this film's existence a bit more interesting than the film itself. There's amusing things. Don't kick the church, it's religious. This is just amusing bits and bobs, but I don't think it quite adds up. I'd probably give this one 3 out of 5 pumpkins. It was a good time. I laughed a lot, but it is also very much a product of its time, and your mileage very much will vary. And then we followed the Monster Mash double feature with the lesbian vampire double feature, Vampyros Lesbos and Daughters of Darkness. So, Vampyros Lesbos, I think both these movies came out in 1971. It's about an insurance agent who goes to an island to deal with an inheritance with a woman, and it's a strange inheritance contract. And of course, the woman is a vampire who is the ex-wife of Dracula, who I guess is dead. The insurance adjuster, she has been having fantasies of having sex with the woman on this island. Plot-wise, it's a little hard to follow. There's 2 blonde women who look nearly identical, and the film does not do a good job of announcing when we have switched from one to the other. The main character goes unconscious, and then we cut to another blonde woman waking up from unconsciousness, acting very confused and unsure about where she is. So it feels like the same person, and then later we cut to the original woman waking up. It took a little bit of work to kind of change our perception of the film once we realized what was actually happening. So not always the best conveyance of information. I think this film is not particularly well regarded, but I thought it was beautiful, just in terms of how expressive its cinematography is. There's some really good lesbian content here if you're into elements of perhaps dubious consent and women having sex with other women. There's a lot for you here. Like, it's got some of the scuzz feeling of a movie that's made with tits in mind, where it opens on this scene of this Dracula character doing a cabaret sort of show, but she's just sort of like doing erotic naked dancing with another naked woman who is posing as a mannequin. All the sex in this movie, it doesn't feel particularly objectified in the way that you would expect it to. They do sort of do a full-length repeat of that show later on in the film. So it has this element of it will occasionally just get lost in the sex stuff and then remember that it has to tell a story and kind of go, yeah, this happened. So it's not coherent, but the cinematography, the lighting, it's so weird. It just creates such an atmosphere. I'd probably give it 3.5, maybe 4. It's definitely going in the category of a movie that I would probably rate in an objective sense fairly low, but that I instantly would like to have a physical copy of to revisit in the future because it just has such an energy and such an interesting inventiveness in its choice of camera angles and camera movements. I frequently find this going to 70s cinema. There was just something in the water back then with like once 8mm and 16mm film stock became more accessible to a broader group of people. Camera techniques sort of loosened up from the studio production standard. Distribution models started to accept less professional things. There's just so much that emerges out of there, so much experimentation in that era. I frequently will watch a movie from the 70s and it feels like I'm watching something that is in a completely different dialect than the one that I'm used to. It's a big problem with modern cinema, at least in America. It is all drawing from the same pools of reference. The invisible style of Hollywood is taken as a inviolable set of like metaphysical laws about how cinema should be. And I think you can tell a good story that follows the principles without following the letter of that law. And I think a lot of 70s cinema, especially that stuff that doesn't get talked about very much, is good for inspiration on that front, for different ways that you could approach filming a scene and showing characters in a scene. And I kept thinking about how so many movies now, there will be like just a sort of, it's a wide shot, but it's more of a medium shot where it's not really the full body in the frame. It's like sort of knees up. And then from there on, it's like, it's all close-ups that are filling in the narrative. I really like the distance in older movies where they're willing to let the characters be small in the frame and show the space and not cut too much, not rely on coverage, and not overuse shot reverse shot. Yeah, it makes the moments when they do get really close on people's faces a lot more effective, especially with the main vampire woman. The pumpkin rating on this one doesn't matter. It's probably not like objectively a great movie, but I really enjoyed it, and I think there's a lot of raw inspiration to be taken from it. Daughters of Darkness, however, is a spectacular film. Probably in the top 5 of the stream, maybe top 10. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how it winds up. Wealthy British guy just got married to a Swedish woman on a whim, and they are on their way back. He's like, oh, I don't want to tell my mother about you yet, and she wants him to tell her. They're supposed to take a boat to his family home, but they get there after the boat is left, so they stay in the hotel until the next boat is able to leave. At the same time, a vampire and her thrall show up at the same hotel and notice this married couple from across the bar, and the main vampire, who is Elizabeth Bathory, immediately is like, oh, that girl is beautiful and I want her and I want them to be part of us. The rest of the movie is her seducing them in increasingly messed up ways. A lot of crossed consent boundaries. Not as much hot sex as in Vampyros Lesbos. Not as many loving shots of naked women. But it makes up for that by having the queeniest, vampiest, high camp villain.
I'm not afraid of you. Oh, yes, little Lady Vice, you are afraid of me. You're terrified.
Her costumes are spectacular. Near the end of the film, she has this sequin dress that just blasts the scene with starbursts. Like Vampyros Lesbos, spectacular cinematography, beautiful lighting, great use of color in the costumes. If you watch this and keep track of who's wearing what color at which time, it sort of maps onto the narrative in an interesting way. It works on a color palette of white, black, and red. I love this because it does not make any attempt to let Elizabeth Bathory be a good person. Ilona, her thrall, is there against her will and is constantly just like, I wish you would let me go. And Elizabeth says, well, of course I'm not going to let you go because you don't want me to let you go. And she says, yeah, of course I don't want you to let me go because you don't want me to want you to let you go.
What are you thinking about?
The same thing you are. What else could I think about?
So often when movies portray now the thrall relationship, it is the vampire and their thrall are in like an actual relationship. Here, it is a very explicit sort of BDSM relationship that is one-sided and deeply unhealthy. And I think that's good for a character that is Elizabeth Bathory, the vampire. The guy that the main woman, the Swedish woman, has married quickly reveals himself to be a sadist and a monster. And of course, Elizabeth Bathory loves him. Bad things happen to everybody. I don't know. I just really admire how this film lets these relationships be really toxic without devolving into melodrama, without pausing all of the circumstances to have characters break down and cry and go, oh, isn't this so bad? And for another character to say, yes, this is bad. No, this is just what it is. And Elizabeth Bathory just has this persuasive, hypnotic power. And there's just not very much that anybody can do about it. And the film proceeds on as a tragedy that includes these sort of erotic non-con scenarios that are really, if you have the right derangement, they are kind of attractive. It's a film that plays well with conflicting elements of desire and disgust, how seemingly fine relationships can be deeply toxic, and how people that you think you know can turn out to be huge fucking monstrous freaks sometimes.
She kidnapped young girls and kept them chained to give blood. Blood for her to bathe in and drink.
No.
But also, Elizabeth Bathory doesn't come off as like this conniving genius. She just seems like a rich person who found a thing that works, drinking the blood of virgins until she gains eternal life, and she just hasn't stopped doing it. She has no interest in accommodating other people's wants. Her like body disposal mechanism is very bad. The cops are on her ass because she's just leaving a trail of bodies everywhere she and her thralls go. She kind of seems like David Tennant's character in Jessica Jones season 1, the Purple Man. Kilgrave. His power is that if he tells you to do something, you have to do it. He just has complete verbal control over anybody in his vicinity, which is deeply horrifying. There's a lot of resonance with Bathory and Kilgrave here. I think that's good. I think that's a really interesting relationship dynamic to explore, and an interesting way to explore abusive partners. The main woman, Valerie is her name, she wants to be with her husband, who is abusive, because they're married. And there is this interesting undercurrent of, who is she property of? Is Valerie property of her husband? Or can she perhaps be freed to be property of Elizabeth Bathory instead? It's interesting how the narratives of emancipation and whatever semblance of feminism that Bathory gestures towards are just her cynically taking advantage of Valerie's position so that she can acquire another thrall and perhaps another vessel for her soul. It's a complicated and difficult film. Probably want to read the content warnings going in. I didn't find it to be nearly as much of a bummer as I was led to believe it to be. Maybe because I'm a freak, I don't know. But it's just such an interesting ride from step to step. It's meaty. There's a lot to chew on. And Elizabeth Bathory's performance is so good. Her thing when she finally first bites Valerie, they're standing on a cliff and she's wearing this glorious cape. All her costumes are so good. But she's wearing this glorious cape. And as the camera is sort of zooming out, she just like extends her cape out like this and then slowly wraps it around Valerie until she bites her neck. There's just so much. She's such a character, and I love her and I want to be like her. I hope I also get impaled on a tree and burned to death someday. That's not true. I don't hope that. Or do I? 5 out of 5 pumpkins. In the Earth, directed by Ben Wheatley, who previously did A Field in England, which I really quite like. In the Earth came out in 2022, I think, and it completely passed me by, and I think it probably passed a lot of people by because it falls into a very unique and underpopulated category, which is films that are about or meaningfully depict the COVID-19 pandemic, either literally or metaphorically. There's like 6 movies that this counts as. There's more than 6, but there's not very many. It's sort of shocking. There's like this brief window of time where movies were able to talk about the pandemic because it was everywhere and it was everyone. And then everybody decided that the pandemic was over and let's pretend it never happened. And now it's just not in the psychosphere at all. This is a film about mycorrhizal networks, the fungus networks in between trees in the woods, old growth forests that have only recently-ish been discovered and are the subject of much speculation and questioning. It's sort of a Tarkovsky Stalker in that main guy has been brought to this place to assist a professor in researching mycorrhizal networks, and it's in the middle of this giant forest preserve that requires the aid of a ranger to get to where they're going because people keep getting lost there, and it's like under quarantine. Well, the whole country's under quarantine because it's a lockdown pandemic, but the forest feels like the zone. And much of the flow of the film feels like Stalker in many respects. But of course they get attacked in the night and all their stuff destroyed and they have to walk through the woods barefoot and bad stuff happens. They get caught by a guy who does bad things. It sort of becomes Misery for a minute there. Actually, this movie is weird because it starts as sort of like Stalker and then it becomes Misery. And then after that, it becomes Upstream Color by Shane Carruth, who is a terrible human being who unfortunately has made 2 very, very, very good films that I wish I felt like we could talk about. Anyway, yeah, this sort of flows like those 3 films where it's like, here we're going through this weird woodsy area, intimidated by how weird it feels. And then, oops, we're being kidnapped and tortured by this wild madman who is one of the better guys of that character type that I've seen in a while. I really liked his vibes.
I've seen it. I've seen this side of the world. You were drawn here to live in the land. Did you ever consider what the ultimate expression of that was when you completely separated from the process of humans?
Then in the end, it all just becomes really bizarre and symbolic. Probably the source of a lot of bad reviews because people are bad at reading movies that aren't perfectly literal or that don't just have characters tell you what's happening. I loved this movie. I really liked this movie. I knew that I would immediately love it when within like the first 20 minutes, there's the scene between the main guy and the ranger. There's this whole undercurrent of like, I'm worried about getting infected by you or infecting other people. And he has to go through this whole process of like getting disinfected and vetted and everything. The ranger is like, well, you know, once this all clears up, everything's gonna go back to normal. And the guy's like, no, people aren't gonna forget what this was like. People, like, thousands of people have died. Nobody's gonna forget this. And she just stone cold looks at him and is like, yes, they will.
Being outside for the first time in months, it's just hard to take it all in, actually.
Well, things will get back to normal quicker than you think. Everyone will forget what happened.
No, I don't think anyone will forget.
Yeah, they will. They'll just get back to their old ways.
And that hits. That moment alone, I knew I was gonna love the hell out of this movie because that is a level of foresight that is shocking for media made like right now. It is absolutely true that in the moment it felt like this is such a huge, impossible thing and so many people have died and everybody's lives are affected. We're never gonna be able to move on from this. Nobody's gonna be able to forget this. And then within a year of the vaccines being released, it was just like, well, the entire economic and political and media elite of the world have decided that they can safely continue extracting profits indefinitely without risk of dying themselves to COVID. So fuck it. Let's just let everything rip. And because Americans got $1,000 once, all the prices went up on everything forever. And there was no choice but to go back to brunch. And everybody had to listen to what these people were saying because the alternative was being fucking homeless. So we just pretended that the pandemic never happened. And now everybody's like, why am I getting sick every 3 weeks? Why doesn't my heart work? Why don't my lungs work? Is it because I'm a bad person? No, it's because you got fucking COVID 5 times because the government wouldn't pay for any mitigation factors that worked really well for the entire length of the pandemic until we just arbitrarily decided it was over. I'm sorry, this is my bugbear. It's a good bugbear to have and you're never gonna convince me that I'm wrong. But anyway, I really liked that this movie was open about that. And as a result, the entire film is sort of about how the pandemic sort of drove people psychotic. And it ultimately is a film about how this monumental crack in society opened up with the pandemic. And there are people who are trying to pretend it never happened. And there are people who are way too obsessed with the fact that it happened. It just sort of circles in on itself into everybody is so desperate to find a reason for why things are happening, for why all these terrible things are happening, that scientists are turning towards ancient satanic texts. Like in the last 30 minutes, there's just like, oh yeah, my primary source for this particular ritual that I'm doing with this science equipment is from a book from the 1600s called The Hammer of the Witches. It's hard to know exactly what it means in the end, but what I took from it was when you try to find God in nature, in the material world, all you're ever going to find is yourself. And chances are you're probably not going to like what you find. This is a really well-paced film. It has kind of a found footage vibe a lot of the time. It has this nice handheld approach. I've seen reviews of people complaining about it, but I thought it was really effective. I don't know, I was riveted the whole way through. I really liked this one. I'm excited to watch it again, and probably double feature it with A Field in England, because they do feel like symbolically very closely related, and I think you will probably be able to understand both films better if you watch them together than you would either one of them by itself. But then you can also just watch them by yourself and it's fine. 5 out of 5 pumpkins. Hey, my girlfriend carved this one. Isn't it fucking weird? It's pretty unsettling, right? Yeah, blame my girlfriend for that one. Chinese ghost story. What if The Evil Dead was made in China? The answer is, it's awesome. There's a Taoist priest who does a rap. There's a woman whose monster power is tongue. I'm sure the Sam Raimi comparisons are done to death about this movie, but it is shocking how much it is an Evil Dead. It just has the vibes. It's there. It's awesome. I loved it. I can't wait to watch it again. Also, give it 4 pumpkins, because it's maybe like there's a chunk of like 20 minutes in between the second and third acts where I feel like it gets a little bit slow, but who cares? It's awesome. House on Haunted Hill, the original, the 1950s original. I grew up with this movie, and I literally haven't seen it since I was a little baby child. My dad friggin' loved this one, and I also loved it because I didn't know anything except what my dad liked, and Vincent Price. Who doesn't love Vincent Price? I put this one on because I hadn't seen it in years, and I felt like this was a pretty good excuse to give it a revisit. I am surprised at how it isn't a traditional ghost movie at all. The way that I remembered this movie was a bunch of people stay overnight in a haunted house, and then haunted spooky things happen, and a bunch of them die, and then the movie is over. I did not remember that actually what this movie is about is Vincent Price trying to goad his wife into killing him so that he can kill her, so he can get away with being separated from her, because this was from the time before no-fault divorce. So the ghost stuff is all pretty universally doubtable. I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't make a lick of sense. Like, the whole thing is they can't leave the house, and then there's a scene where there's a ghost outside of the window that's like, ooh, ah, and girl like screams and is freaked out about it. But then it turns out that was orchestrated, and one of the people was like, ah, yes, and she had exactly the reaction we wanted her to.
After you appeared at the window, everything began to work just as we had planned. You were wonderful. Just the touch that finally drove her into complete hysteria.
And it's like, well, wait. How did you get outside the window? What? Huh?
The caretakers will leave at midnight, locking us in here until they come back in the morning. Once the door is locked, there's no way out. The windows have bars that a jail would be proud of, and the only door to the outside locks like a vault.
A lot of the plot, when you like sit down, like think about what happened and who is like double crossing who, really doesn't make a lick of sense, but that's okay, because Vincent Castle in the theater had a skeleton on a string with spooky red eyes that flew out at you whenever the right moment came, and oh, isn't that scary? They don't do movies like they used to. I really miss it. I miss those days, the 50s, when I was alive. Talk about received nostalgia. What is there to say about House on Haunted Hill? It's fun, it's campy, There's a great YouTube poop that we watched afterwards.
I'm Frederick Lawton, and I've rented the house on House Hill tonight so that my wife can give a party. A house party.
Definitely don't stay the night in a house that has an acid pit. I lose my mind at the fact that part of Vincent Price's plan is letting himself be shot by a gun with blanks so that a guy will come out of the shadows and be like, ooh, time to dispose of the body, so that then he can dispose of his body by dumping him into a pit of acid. And then once the acid has cleaned off everything except the bones, he took the bones out of the acid, rigged them up to a very elaborate like marionette system with strings and everything that he is controlling from the closet on his chest. That was just his plan, was to do that. Unbelievable. 5 stars. 5 pumpkins. I don't actually give it 5 pumpkins. I'm gonna say 3.5. 4? 3.5. 4. This is always a problem. I don't know what I would give it, because I'll watch this movie any time of the day. I fucking House on Haunted Hill. What do you want? Objectively, probably a 3. Good vibes and nostalgia, 4. 4 pumpkins. One of them is a ghost. There you go. Night Train to Terror. We did this as a double feature with House on Haunted Hill. Not really a great mix, except that we watched that YouTube poop in between them, and it perfectly set up Night Train to Terror, because this is a movie made up of 3 other movies. There's a director or studio who just had all these projects that weren't able to be finished, so they just had these unfinished horror movies sitting in the can. And this film was like, all right, let's shoot some bridging material and just cobble together a single sort of anthology movie out of these unfinished movies. The problem is that none of the unfinished movies were finished, and so trying to cut them together into actually sensical bits of plot really doesn't work, because it's pretty clear that essential material was not shot because the movies weren't finished. The bridging material is this eternal musical number by these happy rockin' teens, and then also God and the devil in a train car judging the moral weight of the people and the stories that they're watching. This movie doesn't make a lick of sense. It comes out the door swinging already a YouTube poop. It is an experience that is hallucinatory and probably a little bit toxic to the logical mind, and maybe we need some of that every once in a while. I don't know what the hell was going on. I gave up trying to understand what was going on very early into the film and just sort of let it roll past me. And on that level, it was an excellent experience. The one like really good thing that I would say that this movie has going for it is it has these like shockingly good moments, some really great stop motion. It's relatively cheap stop motion, but there's something charming in it. There's a guy who's looking up at a big fucked up monster and he's like, ah, and then they show the scene where the monster like does something to the guy, and at that point the guy is stop motion. So they've made a little clay guy for the clay monster to fuck with. There's also a scene where a guy gets electrocuted. It's just hilarious. I can't, the way they shot it, whatever aperture and frame rate they were shooting at, and the way that I don't know how they did it, but it's the funniest shit I've ever seen, and it's also kind of horrific, and it's something. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that is so something.
Hey, George, I'm starving. How about some hamburgers and beer?
There's no food on this train.
What kind of train is this?
Some call it the Heavenly Express. Others, Satan's Cannonball.
I don't know what, if any of it is good, except for the stop motion stuff. A lot of that is really fun, but it sure is an experience. My life is more interesting for now having seen this film, even though I will never be able to know for sure what damage it wrought upon me. I want to give it a 1 pumpkin. 2. I'll give it 2. The stop motion stuff was charming enough that I would give it 2. I would say that this would be a really great one to put on with a bunch of friends when you want to heckle a movie. This is a great getting drunk with some pals, let's just shout at the TV screen for an hour and 20 minutes type movie. And now here we are at last. Ghostwatch. Ghostwatch, the last film that we watch every year. This is the film that is the hinge upon which our entire marathon sits. Revolves? Hinges. I have seen this movie now like 6 or 7 times, and I'm shocked that it has not gotten annoying or old. I love rewatching movies. Even I have limits. But somehow, by virtue of only watching it once a year on Halloween and also preempting it by 30-odd other horror movies in the lead up to watching Ghostwatch, it has yet to lose any of its shine for me. This is a television broadcast from 1991. It's a BBC investigation of ghosts at a house that uses actual BBC announcers and personalities and was aired only once on Halloween with like a brief thing at the very beginning that says, hey, this is fiction. But if you tuned in pretty much at any point after that, you had no idea that this was fiction, and it's using people that they would be used to seeing on the BBC doing all sorts of other stuff, like news announcers and children's show hosts and stuff like that. Horrible things happen to everybody in this film as spooky shenanigans occur, and then there's a ghost invasion. I love a good ghost invasion. It freaked people out. There was a big panic, and it was never aired again on television. I thought it was really appropriate that we opened fairly early on in this marathon with Late Night with the Devil. I came away from that film feeling like it's all right, it's pretty okay. And then watching this, it really hammered home for me that actually no, Late Night with the Devil has a lot of problems. There's just something effortlessly authentic about this movie. And it is fiction. It was filmed beforehand. They did do multiple takes. It had a script. Every character in this movie has a perfect analog in Late Night with the Devil. And it's just like you go down the list, and it really is just every single one of them is lackluster in Late Night with the Devil on some very important axis. Like the skeptic is worse, the parapsychologist investigating the haunted kid is worse, the haunted kid is worse, the host is good. Like David Dastmalchian is like the best part of that movie, and he is the one who doesn't have like a straightforward corollary, because the main host of Ghostwatch, the old guy, he is not really involved in the spooky stuff. He is sort of the most outsider of them all, whereas in Late Night, David Dastmalchian's guy is a lot more involved. So that's really the point that movie does well, and I would say it trying to frame itself as a full episode of a late night television show is a smart move, but it just lacks the authenticity that this film has, because it is shot using BBC equipment, using BBC people, and it is what it is. It is exactly what it is. And you watch Late Night with the Devil, and it just feels like it's trying too hard and doesn't have enough faith in our ability to find spooky shit in the walls, in the subtext, just in the vibes. For all that this is just sort of a straightforward ghost investigation, it has these little hints of themes where, like, Pipes, the ghost, is a man who's dressed as a woman who killed people when he was alive before he died. So there is this undercurrent of transphobia, and there's also this undercurrent of like the scars of colonialism. There's just all these little hints and gestures towards really foundational aspects of the British psychosphere. And I really like how this draws towards an apocalypse, fundamentally about not confronting the past, but rather letting it roll over and through you until it is what is driving you. And it becomes the spectacle that we're all sort of idly watching occur, but we're not actually fixing any of the historic wrongs. We're not making life better. We're just ogling at how bad it is and how that rots our souls and disrupts society to its very foundations as we're sort of living through. I don't know how much of that really is truly in the movie, but it's there. There's enough there that you can read it, and it's just a good flick. It's just a nice, solid, efficient, good movie, and it's the perfect watch for this stream, and I think it perfectly characterizes exactly what the marathon is all about, because we could just watch the classics every year. The obvious thing for the centerpiece of a Halloween stream to be would be John Carpenter's Halloween, but everybody has seen it. Everybody has seen Halloween, and everybody knows it's great, and everybody knows it's important and influenced absolutely everything. But there's more. There's so much more, and I think highlighting Ghostwatch as the centerpiece is a fantastic elaboration of the ethos of the whole marathon, because it's not what you would expect, but it is sophisticated and interesting, but also it predates the found footage genre. It is silly. It's all of these interesting elements that aren't what you would expect. And that encourages me to search for all sorts of different movies. This marathon has been an extremely varied selection of flicks. I would have to say the big standouts for me, let me just look back through what have been the standouts this year. Pied Piper and the Vortilac, I've talked about them to a bunch of people already. I really like the Vortilac. I am thinking about doing an essay just about that one. Oh yeah, Ganja and Hess was spectacular. Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, Halloween 3, those two were big standouts. Oh yeah, Haxon. That was cool. I've never seen that before, and I can't believe that movie is real. I can't believe how old it is and how modern it is. That one's unbelievable. Yeah, The Gate was the best of the 80s kids movies where the kids say slurs, the one that's definitely held up the best. Yeah, Invasion of the Body Snatchers was a Timekeepers of Eternity, obviously. Paradise, instant classic for me. I've already shown it to somebody else. Oh yeah, World Apartment Horror, absolutely. Oh, Mad Monster Party was a lot of fun. Rankin Bass. It's the Mummy! It's the Mummy! Yeah, it's been a really good marathon. This process of making these vlogs has been interesting. I don't know what takeaways I have, except that this is a really fun project to do once a year. And it's also exhausting. It is like an injection of media material into my brain that like gets the juices flowing and makes me think big, loud thoughts about all sorts of stuff. It's a very worthwhile experience for any of you out there to just try to challenge yourself, to watch a bunch of movies in a month, not just the big ones, but to challenge yourself to reach out and find things that might be outside of your comfort zone, or stuff that you haven't heard of or only kind of heard of, or from countries that you've never seen movies from, or eras that you haven't seen movies from. Challenge yourself. Put in some big crowd pleasers, put in some stuff. I probably could have put more crowd pleasers in this year, honestly, but even then, you balance it. You find your Lisa Frankensteins and Halloween 3s, and you pepper them in with your Mystics in Bali and your Night Trains to Terror. I really like movies. I do just really like movies is the thing, and it's been a delight to do this marathon again. Yeah, and I hope that you've enjoyed this video series, and I guess now I'll take it to my final rankings. Oh God, I'm done. It's finally done. I'd like to thank my very patient $10 a month supporters over on Patreon and Camaraderie. Alex, Azrael Susie Miniike, Athiet, Bingus, Bobby Jane DeForge, Cam Chacon, Dick Beninia, Emma Sylvia, Foxquirk, Halsey, J Mac D, Jacqueline Merritt, JB Silbanary Wolf, Kageki Kokoro, Lily Jade, Aura Barista, Patrick Feeney, Pinball Witch, Rachel Zane, Richard Dunbeck, Sophia, Sophie Huiberts, TB Skyen, Vesta Beaumont, Zed Bellicose, Rubeline, Scott Olson, Prum, Jay Jorts, Chthonic Syzyges, Kate Shrike, Vriskazone, Now I Only Want to Triumph, Dyke Doll, the internet's beloved Princess Grace, and Evelay Chance. If you would like to have your name read aloud in the credits of one of these videos, go to patreon.com/LTAS or camaraderie.co/SarahZedek and pledge to give me at least $10 a month. $5 supporters get my notes, scripts, behind-the-scenes videos, and anything else I might release a little bit earlier than everybody else. And if you'd like to hear more of my voice more regularly, the Trans Questioning podcast is back, and it updates every other week. I'm also streaming on twitch.tv/SarahZedek, and you can find me on all the social media places at Sarah Zedek or at HMS No Fun.